every Monday, we try and get you prepared for when the lights go out. And Stefan Verstappen is our emergency preparedness expert and author of The Art of Urban Survival. Stefan, welcome back. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing pretty good, Richard. It's been a beautiful week, a couple of thunder boomers, but for the rest, it's been sunny and warm here, eh?
Yeah, we had a few sort of little brownouts, I guess we call them, during the thunder boomers, which we get from time to time, which is just kind of like a mini dress rehearsal. You know, all of a sudden you start to panic. Oh, no, I can't make a cup of coffee.
Oh, yeah.
And even though you know the lights are out, you go into a room and you flip the light switch. It's just like muscle memory, right? Okay, so having said that, we've been talking about first aid, and we talked about triage, I think, last week.
Yes.
So we're going to continue. You're going to continue to tell us a little bit about first aid. And again, this is in the absence of what we traditionally think of the first responders, like paramedics. Let's just say there's kind of a breakdown in civil society or whatever, or you're in a remote location and you need to be the first responder. So you wanted to talk about some of the common mistakes, maybe the top 3 mistakes people make when they arrive at the scene of an accident.
Absolutely. First of all, again, I'd like to emphasize to the listeners to please get a first aid course training from St. John Ambulance. Get the standard first aid, which is a 2-day course, because what we're going into, Richard, like we're not going to be able to rely on first responders, paramedics, ambulance, fire department to come right away, even with a minor disaster. I was on the ham radio when we had the blackout there in Toronto, listening into the police trunk line with the police and emergency services, and listening to the crosstalk there for about 30 minutes. Basically, every emergency service was overwhelmed. So there was no more ambulances, no more paramedics, no more police, no more fire department within about 30 minutes of a basic blackout. This wasn't a big natural disaster. This was the power went out an hour later. That was, remember, we had that flood there. That's when the GO train was flooded there in the Don River Valley there. But they were booked up. So if we are facing an emergency, then you need somebody around you that knows basic first aid. And so again, folks, this is we're going through some very serious times right now, and natural disasters are on the increase. The tornadoes, the hurricanes, the floods. You got to learn your first aid.
Okay, if nothing happens, what's the worst? The worst is that you took a first aid kit, and if you're on a camping trip and someone cuts their knee, you're prepared.
Absolutely, yeah. I remember my first time I soloed in Algonquin Park. Took my canoe out there, and there was a family next door, and one of the kids got pretty nasty cut on his knee from a hatchet. They did not have a first aid kit on them. I had the first aid kit. I was 15. So, but I'll be honest with you, I felt really good to be able to treat them. Again, I was a Boy Scout, and we learned first aid in Boy Scouts too. So get a first aid course under your belt so you know what you're doing. So here's a couple common mistakes that people make.
Hold on, I'm just going to jump in here because I was too long in my preamble, so it's all me. My bad. So we're going to take a time out. We'll come back with Stefan Verstappen. The Art of Urban Survival is the book. The Emergency Preparedness Expert. ChinaStrategies.com, the website, formingcommunities.com as well. We'll come back. The top 3 mistakes people make at the scene of an accident. Stand by for more.
Back to the conversation on The Richard Syrett Show. News Talk, Saga 960 AM.
And we are back with Stefan Verstappen, emergency preparedness expert, author of The Art of Urban Survival, formingcommunities.com, the website, ChinaStrategies.com as well. So, Stefan, the top 3 mistakes that people make when they arrive at the scene of an accident and are trying to help.
Well, the top 3 mistakes involve moving the casualty, moving the body in different ways. The number one thing you should learn is not to move the victim, the patient, especially if it's such as a car accident or a fall or or a bicycle accident or a fall down a hill, because you don't know whether or not they might have a spinal injury. Now, typically, for example, you come across a car accident. I've come across a couple of them. There might be somebody lying on the road. Now, the first thing everybody does, lying in the middle of the road, the first thing everybody does is they want to grab the person, the victim, and drag them off the road. This is a big mistake. You can't do that. It's better for you to get out some flares or some red cones. And listen, folks, you got to carry some flares in your car, some reflecting cones that you can lay out in case of an accident. This is just being a good citizen. So you block off traffic, but you do not move the person until paramedics arrive. And if you're on your own, then until you strap them to a backboard or a spinal board, because you don't know. For example, there was a story going around St. John Ambulance when I was working there about a paramedic that was in a car accident, and he was thrown clear and he was lying in the middle of the road. And then there's people, they want to help. They have good intentions. It's not their fault. They started to move him, and he started to tell them, please don't move me, don't touch me, because he could sense he had a neck injury. He knew, and they moved him. And he said that when they moved him, he immediately felt his body go numb from the shoulders down.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, terrible. And he knew he had a neck injury. And sure enough, after that, he became a paraplegic. But up until the point that the rescuers moved him, he could have recovered from it. So number one rule, don't move the person until you've done a complete check. The way you do a complete check is you run your fingers from the top of their head all the way to their toes. You feel around the skull, you feel for bleeding and bumps and bruises, or God forbid, dents. Then you feel down the back of their neck. You can feel if there is a vertebrae out of alignment. You can feel it. Of course, you're doing this very gently. And then you're going down their body, each arm, the chest, and then down the legs until you can figure out what their injuries are. But up until the point where you've had a good assessment, you don't move them until paramedics arrive. And then if there is no paramedics, just to be on the safe side, we always strap them to a backboard or a spinal board. Now, when you take the standard first aid course from St. John, and I'm not getting paid to promote, by the way, but when you take that course, they will teach you how to immobilize a person on a backboard so that you can safely move them without inflicting any unintentional damage to the spine.
Okay. Number two,
the other thing people do is when they see somebody who's passed out, and that could be for any number of reasons, but they're passed out, what they try to do is put a pillow under their head. This is a big mistake. Putting a pillow under the head brings the chin forward, and there's a greater chance that you're going to cut off the airway, especially if they're unconscious. If they're unconscious and they're lying on their back, then there's a chance of what they used to call swallowing your tongue. We've seen this in the movies. Oh, he's swallowing his tongue. Get a spoon or something like that. That's a misnomer. You don't swallow your tongue. But if you're unconscious, the muscles in your throat will relax, and the tongue will fall back against the back of the throat and cut off your breathing. Now, if you put a pillow under their head, this makes the situation worse. So, and the other thing too is if you're treating somebody for shock, now shock can kill you. You can literally die by being frightened to death. It's true, because a great scare can cause you to go into shock. And what shock is a sudden drop in blood pressure. The blood vessels dilate. You don't have enough blood going to the brain. You have anoxia, and you can die from shock. You can die from fear, but probably it's very rare that people die from fear. But more likely, if you're injured and you're in pain, you will go into shock. And so tilting the head up, again, is the worst thing. In the case of shock, you leave their head down flat, and then you put something under their legs so that the blood in their legs can, through gravity, go back into the body, and the heart can pump it to the brain.
Good tip. Okay. And
Final thing. Do we still have time?
We have a couple minutes here. Just.
Okay. Now, the final thing is what's called the recovery position. So if the person has passed out And it's not because of a fall or a car accident or going off the bicycle or falling down a hill. So you're relatively sure that it's not a spinal injury involved. This could be an overdose of drugs or alcohol or shock. Or the thing to do is to roll them onto their side, and it's called the recovery position. So it's not on their stomach, it's not on their back, but it's on their side. So one arm is under their head as support, and you got to make sure that their face is pointing downwards. Now, the reason for this is, again, because if a person is unconscious and they're lying on their back, the tongue can relax, fall against the back of the throat, and cut off the breathing. So you bring their face downwards so that they can breathe. And another thing is that many injuries will involve vomiting. And if you leave them lying on their back, they will vomit into their mouth,
right?
And they will choke on their own vomit. Now, one last thing. I don't hear people talk about this too often, but let's say your teenage daughter comes home and she's been out drinking and she is absolutely wasted, right? And she passes out on the couch. Put her in the recovery position. I can't tell you, I don't know what the statistics are, but it's pretty high. The number of people that die from drinking too much, passing out, laying on their back, and while they're passed out, they throw up and they drown on their vomit.
Right.
It happened to a schoolgirl that I went to school with. She was a bass player in the same orchestra as me. Lovely girl. She got really drunk. She passed out and she choked on her own vomit. So recovery position. Put them on the side, face down. So if they do vomit, the vomit will just come right out of their mouth and onto the ground.
All right, good tips. 3 tips and 3 mistakes to avoid when you're on the scene of an accident or someone who's unconscious. Stefan Verstappen is our emergency preparedness expert. He joins us every Monday at this time, and the website's formingcommunities.com and chinastrategies.com. The book is The Art of Urban Survival. Stefan, we'll talk again next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Have a good week.
You too.